Welcome to the Leadership Journal with your hosts, Nick Helgett and Robby Woodard,
where we cover our journey, struggles, and obstacles that we have overcome, and moments in our careers that have led to growth. Here on Table Talk each week, where we break down various topics and journals of our trials and tribulations. All right, everybody, welcome to the Leadership Journal, where we delve into the art of leadership. In today's episode, we're going to explore the various styles of leadership and how they can impact your teams and your organizations. Now, whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey, understanding each of these styles can enhance your effectiveness and your adaptability. I'm joined by my co-host, Nick Helgett, and our partner, our other co-host, Jed Stoltz. Thank you for joining me on this conversation today, guys. I hope it's a good one for everybody. Probably going to be a multi-parter because there's a lot to say about the various styles. Just so everyone knows, there's 7 styles we're going to break down. There are transformational leadership, transactional leadership, servant leadership, autocratic leadership, democratic, laissez-faire, and situational. Now, let me ask you, Nick, what is your definition of leading or of leadership and its importance?
I guess my definition would be the person that's out in front guiding their team, whether it's through good times or bad. You know, sometimes it's a protective role, sometimes it's a disciplinary role. I guess you can almost define it as somewhat of a parenting process. You're developing the people that are in your charge and helping them grow and succeed and become the person that they want to be and get to the position that they want to be in, whether it's they're aspiring to be a leader or maybe it's a individual contributor role that they feel that they could add a ton of value in the organization. So how do you help them develop and get them there? You are a person for the people.
I love how you said leading out in front, leading the way. I want to come back to the parenting process thing at some point because I love that. And I want
to, as a parent of, almost 20 years, like it there's in my journey as a leader, you start to see parallels with parenting, and that's not to say that your workforce is children, but some of the same ideas and principles that you apply to your parenting can also transfer into your leadership.
Okay. Jed, let me ask you.
Same question. I guess I would define leadership in a broader sense as a leader, I suppose, as the person who's responsible for helping the team achieve its mission. Ooh, as a very broad definition, right? But the person in a leadership position is, they're supposed to be that person who knows where you want to go, kind of understands where you are, and helps connect those dots for the rest of the team, and helps them grow. It could be helping them grow, it could be helping them understand the vision. It comes in a lot of different forms, but at the end of the day, right, that's what they're responsible for. That person's duty is to get the team from where they are to where they want to be.
And I love that. That's the person that's leading the charge and helping the team connect the dots and achieving their mission. And for me, I would put both those together. Person in front, person guiding the way. You're not in charge of the objective happening. You're helping the team achieve the expected results within their capabilities. And like we had said in a previous episode, you don't need to know everything to be able to effectively lead. You should be able to know how to resource and how to find the right person to get to the desired results. And I know we're going to get to a lot of these different leadership styles that'll help us break these down and see where maybe you as a listener fit, and then how maybe each style works for you, whether you're a combination of them, you're a single leadership style, or maybe you have your own that you want to pitch to us in some kind of context, in some kind of comment to let us know how you're feeling. But there's a variety of ways that you can achieve that mission, that end result, without having to be one particular type of person.
I would even go so far as to say, for anybody who's aspiring to leadership, somebody who is not in a position of leadership right now, but maybe wants to be, it's a good opportunity for you to think about what kind of leader you want to be, so you can develop those kinds of skills. Not that there isn't a valid time and a place for each of these leadership styles, but I remember early on in my career when I was hourly in a non-leadership role, wanting to get into leadership, people asking me, what we're talking about today, what does that mean to you? What does that look like? And, at some point early on, what does that look like means being the boss, right? I think I know how this stuff is supposed to work, and I think I can be the right person to make those decisions. And, if you haven't been in a leadership position or done a lot of leading, it can be really confusing trying to understand, what kind of leader you want to be and how to get there. So this is, I think, could be a valuable conversation for anyone who's in that position, who's sitting here thinking, I want to be a leader right now, but what does that really look like? What does that mean for me, and how do I get there?
For everybody out there, we lead in different capacities, whether you're a by title leader in an organization, you have some kind of position where you're in charge of people, or you have people that report to you, or you're on the floor with a team of people and you're leading that group of people through your own personal experiences or through how you're wanting to help improve. And you're not leading by authority, but you're leading by helping the group do better, do more. This is a skill. There are natural born leaders, but a lot of leaders that I have met and interacted with had to learn.
Generally, the best leaders are the ones that are developed.
Yes. Leading is about developing, mentoring, and influencing others. Just because you came in the world and you've got this knack for leading, there's someone who works with you or works for you that has the potential, that maybe they don't realize that they have that potential, and they just need some more confidence. They need some more ability brought out of themselves to say that I can do this. Here's how.
Yeah. So let's start with a transformational leader. So the key definition of a transformational leader is leaders who inspire and motivate followers to exceed their own self-interest for the good of the organization. I think that's it's very key to leadership is bigger than you, right? And to step out of the mindset that, well, this said process affects me in this way, and being able to step back and look at that bigger picture. In our last episode, we talked about detaching. That's part of detaching, is to be able to step away from the small thing and try to look at the bigger picture and how it applies to a much grander scale. And as kind of what we were talking about this episode beforehand, before we started on the air, Jed, you gave a really awesome example of how you were able to explain why a process was a certain way and how it affected the company on a much grander scale, to really drive home that why, and have that employee have a greater understanding of of what their impact on the business is financially, with their upstream and downstream customers. I felt like it was a really, really, really good way of illustrating the impact that they were having.
Yeah, it's been my experience when I was hourly, and and you have a person in leadership position, a manager or something, somebody along those lines, who will come to you and say, we're changing this policy, we're changing this procedure, and sometimes the most frustrating part of that situation is just not understanding why.
Yep. Because
it feels like what we've been doing works for me. I've gotten results that way, and it's normal, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, part of that transformational leadership is helping people understand that normal is great right now. How do we take that next step, right? To connect with our vision, whatever that may be, whether your vision is being the best at something, making the highest quality, the most, innovating something so that it's changes the market, right? Whatever your goal is, how do you connect people to that vision in a way that they want to take that next step, to be better, to make that innovation happen? And a lot of that oftentimes is just the why. Yeah. Why are we doing what we're doing?
Well, and when all of your examples and all your words, the key words that stick to me when I think about the transformational leader, I think about the leader that sees growth and motivation towards potential. And then you can be a leader that just says, go do it. Well, at that point, you're a manager. You're not leading. You're not giving them the influence. The growth leader focuses on the why, asking a lot of questions, getting someone invested so that they can see that potential. But then you're asking them, okay, so now how? How do we improve? How do we change? How do we focus on some things? And okay, so now we see why, we see how, but now what do we do differently? And when we pair why, how, and what together, now ultimately becomes, can we make this happen?
Absolutely. I mean, you're right on the nose, right? For me, transformational leadership, in addition to connecting people with the vision and the why we do what we do, just as far as having those conversations around changes that as leaders we may have decided, also fosters an environment where people who understand why what we're trying to do and why we want to do it can come up with their own ideas, because they see the business way differently than we do. And they might see something that they deal with every single day that could be improved, and it's not even on our radar because we're too focused on the big picture. And they can come up and say, hey, you know what? I think if we made a course correction in this area, made this change, it would push us a lot closer to our why, to our vision, than what we're currently doing. And it gives them an opportunity to show us the business differently. And I think about an example of somebody who works for the company that Nick and I work for, which is a manufacturing company. And there's not where the building that we work at, but one of our sister buildings. They had a piece of equipment that utilizes an extraordinarily long belt from one end of this equipment to the other. And I can't tell you how long it was, but it needed to be changed regularly. It's very wide, it's very long, it's very heavy. And every time they had to change this moving belt, they had to shut this piece of equipment down for, a whole day, not just a whole shift, but for quite a long time. And it took, 5-10 millwrights working on this piece of equipment just to get this belt in place and threaded up, because it was so heavy, so cumbersome, and so difficult to do. And one of the employees who works with that equipment every day didn't like having to do that. He wanted his equipment to run because he understood what the company was trying to achieve long term, and he wanted to help be a part of that. And he engineered a device you could attach to that piece of equipment that would feed the new belt onto the piece of equipment while it's jogging. And I don't understand all the ins and outs of it because we don't have that equipment at our building. But from what I recall, when I heard the story and I read about it in our company newsletter, was that you attach it to the old belt, jog the machine, and it will route and run the new belt all the way back around, and then you lace it up in the machine, and it takes a couple hours to go through the whole process instead of an entire day. And you can thread up the next belt on that other piece of equipment that's mounted on the machine while it's running, so that you don't have to create additional downtime. And I think it's a great example of a leadership team at that mill who created an environment where the team understood what they were doing and why they were trying to do it, and empowered them to make a decision, come up with an idea that changed the way that they run their business. They are so much more profitable, I'm sure, not taking all that downtime. And it didn't come from somebody in the boss's chair. It didn't come from somebody with a fancy degree or with a salary. It came from somebody on the floor who runs that equipment. And to me, that's what transformational leadership looks like.
So like when I hear that example and I think about like the growth and motivation, that team member was so empowered and motivated to make sure that they were successful that they took that step themselves. Now, I'm sure we could get to other examples of other leadership styles where maybe that leader helped encourage that in other ways. But that, to me, sounds like that organization is all focused on being better and focused on growing, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned earlier, kind of in your description of that what we were going to cover, you said that, that there's various types. And that, to me, means a leader can be a combination of the topics that we're discussing. Just because you understand and employ transitional leadership doesn't mean that you might not have some transactional characteristics. And a transactional leader focuses on supervision, organization, and performance. Rewards and punishments are used to motivate team members. So, Robby, when I was working for you and, when you and I were peers, I could see some of those aspects in how you lead. Like, you were very focused on organization and how the team was performing, how our capacities were. You were very in tune with the data, and which still to this day helps me in my current role. Like, those were things that I could take from you, the tools that I didn't have before, and have helped improve the way I lead. And so, like, some key characteristics of that is like having clear structures, being task oriented, and management by exception. But the being task oriented and having clear structures on how we do things has helped me be more effective in multiple ways. Being able to have data on hand when senior leadership is asking for certain things, I can pull a report now and have those answers for those key metrics that we're looking at to set our daily direction on what our priorities are for the day. Whether it's a type of product that we need, whether we're low on something and we need to focus on, our inbound side and our inbound processes more. It's allowed me to be able to change my priorities on the fly.
I also think, I love that these two are right next to each other, because I think on their surface they look so opposite.
Yeah.
Right. We just talked about transformational leadership, and we talked about how it's inspiring and motivating people to exceed their own self-interest for the good of the organization. It's very open, right? Yep. The example that I gave of the team member who engineered this solution to changing this large conveyor belt. Excuse me. He did so in an environment where he was allowed to ask the right questions and bring these kinds of ideas to his supervisors and to the maintenance crew and get the support he needed to figure out how to actually take this idea and put it into a reality. And like we talked about a few episodes ago, that not having guardrails, right, kind of situation, like, hey, you have a great idea, we support that, run with it, kind of mentality. And then we have transactional leadership, which is much more structured and task oriented, and I think of that as being maybe more militaristic, right? In a way, sort of not quite command and control, but I suppose you could call it command and control. And I think that there's value. We also talked about how there's value in each of these styles of leadership and cons in each of these styles of leadership. And I think, I seen transactional leadership right after transformational leadership makes me think of the times that I, in my career, have had to use an improvement plan for a team member who just was not meeting expectations and who's been coached and encouraged and talked to, but has not made the requisite progress. And, we have to kind of do something more serious. And that's where, to me, transactional leadership may have its value, right? This is a time where I need to sit down with this employee, this team member, and we need to come up with a structure that is going to work for them and help them be successful and help the team move toward its goals so that they can thrive. And obviously the idea is that at some point we'll start pushing them into that transformational environment, but not everyone thrives there. And sometimes people need that structure to be successful. They need somebody to tell them, this is what you're going to do from here from A to B to C to D and so on, so that they kind of get the hang of it and build those habits. And then when they're stronger, you can let them go on their own. And I just love that these two are right next to each other, because it really illustrates that not just dichotomy. There's more than two styles of leadership, but that there is no one right way to do it all the time or for every person.
Well, and what I also thought of is, your description of the belt thing, that performance metrics, that organization, that keeping track of these KPIs and having that data, that correlates into, how that transformation, how that person made that improvement, and how that correlates to our data. Look at this positive improvement, this upswing in this KPI, because you came up with this innovative idea to cut our downtime. So now that you're looking at both things, you have that environment, and that has positively affected this transaction, basically, is very impactful, because now they see data-driven results for their accomplishments.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great way to feed into that transformational culture, to show everybody, look at what, it's gonna make up a name, look at what Kevin did in this area and how impactful that was to the business, and inspire other people who have their own ideas. Come to us with your ideas. Like, that's what we want you to do, and we'll help you see them through into a way that's positive for the business, and create some ownership. Make people feel like they have a stake in what, not just feel, but give people a stake in what they're doing every day, because people don't want to just be worker bees who show up and contribute nothing. They want to have value. They want to add value. And for me, transformational leadership is a great way that people can do that.
Well, and when you talk about rewards and stuff, a lot of companies these days are coming back to performance bonuses, or quarterly bonuses based on performance for the facility or the company, or those kinds of things.
And downtime is an easily measurable
and
impact.
If you've improved
financially
downtime, exponentially across a quarter because you implemented this creative idea, I mean, that's an incentive right there.
Yeah.
That could be cash back in that person's pocket.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a very easy way to measure the impact someone's had on the value to the company, and provide, if a financial incentive is the appropriate incentive in this situation, to provide that incentive.
Yeah. A lot of companies are, I feel like, mid 2000s, mid to early 2000s, companies had really gone away from that kind of incentive, but I feel like a lot of companies are going back to it, and it helps drive that people to have, my ideas do matter, they count.
Yeah.
I appreciate you calling me out, and that stuck with you, the things that I try to lead through and try to lead with to help others see growth and potential.
It's a great way to connect to the why.
Yeah. And my brain goes to, here's how I can break down a story with different tidbits of information that maybe you can't see, but I can.
Yep.
And it's one of my skills that I try to use on a daily basis. I used it when I worked in stores to try to help look at, how can I see what the customer is purchasing, and help my department leads or my team see that this is the stuff we need to focus on at this time of day, because this is when it's bought, and it needs to be ready before this time. And I've had my own struggles. I've had my own journey through this. But with these two, when people hear the word transaction, they think of a cashier. They think of a grocery store.
Yep.
Where you have your items, you get them all rang up. Now you're paying for your items. Or you need to have this conversation. Here's a result, done. That's a different kind of transaction than like you had said, being a transactional leader that leads by incentives, by rewards, by performance gains, by data to help set up plans, set up improvements, to help guide somebody to be able to do better, so we don't have to look at the negative.
Yep.
Because if you lead by fear, if you lead by the negative, you're not going to get positive results.
Well, no. And if you're always focused on, well, we're in the red here on these metrics, we need to pick it up. Well, what about these 3 areas that we did really good? We knocked it out of the park. And so now, instead of, when you're leading with, we did so awesome over here, here's where we can take it up to the next level and, continue to transform our business and not just lead with the negative. That can be very impactful.
Yeah. Like Jed, one of my biggest things that I try to always ask either my peer, my team member, my direct report, or my boss is, what was the win in this situation, not just what was the opportunity. Because if you, like you had said, only focusing on the negativity, you're not reminding people where the success is happening. And there are a lot of times where our bosses are only going to see the red numbers. They're not going to see all the positive black, and they're going to want to see all the red go away. You're never going to see red go away. If red is completely gone, what is winning? But then, are there shortcuts? Are there things that are missing?
Well, if red's completely gone, then are we looking at the right metrics?
Exactly.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Because if
there should always be room for growth, which means there should always be something on the verge of yellow or red. And if there isn't, then we're not measuring the right things.
Yeah. Like, you can have the same 9 metrics every day, but if there's a hidden number that we never look at and that someone stumbles upon and that has a greater impact, but no one cares about it, be that leader that rings the bell, that blows the whistle, that says, hey, we need to look at this. Because if it goes on too long and it doesn't get caught, you're handicapping your ability to do better, in my opinion.
I'd like to take a second, if we can, to talk maybe about some of the cons of these 2 styles of leadership that we've talked about so far. Because I think we've talked a lot about the pros, what is helpful, but I think it's good that we talk about some of the reasons why it may not be the right leadership style in a given situation. And while I think of transformational leadership as being a generally positive thing, I think I touched on it just a little bit in my little speech, if you will, earlier, that sometimes people need that structure, especially if you're new to an organization or you're new to to an industry. You may need somebody to tell you, like, hey, this is what your day should look like, kind of as a baseline. And then as you grow into that, start making tweaks and adjustments to be more effective, do things that work for you or add value in different ways. But I think sometimes when we get into transformational leadership, it's easy to say, hey, you're great, you got this, let's go out and make this business work. And then, you go to your office
your
and
oyster.
Yeah. And then you go to your office to go do your tasks, and you got someone who's sitting here going, what am I supposed to do? What are the expectations?
Situational paralysis.
And then you end up with situational paralysis because you don't even know where to start. They dropped a title, they dropped a job on your plate, and you're in a new place, and you're like, what do you want from me, right? And so I think that there's time and a place for doing the transformational leadership, but there's also a time and a place where you got to be more involved than just hey, we're out here to make the best whatever and make the most money, so go do that. I believe in you.
So that makes my brain go nerd for a second. And we all play D&D. I don't know if the listeners play D&D, but when you're the dungeon master, you're the game master.
Well, that's out of the closet.
Sorry, had to come out at some point.
We probably lost some listeners, but we don't blame you.
When you're the DM or GM and you have a story in front of you, if you've never written a story that is going to guide a group of players, you're going to sit there for a very long time, probably asking yourself, how do I start?
Yep.
Where do I start? And then you're going to hit all these bumps and you're going to hit all these bumps, all these obstacles, all these hurdles along the way. And at some point, you're going to need somebody to give you structure.
Yep.
To say,
just remember, you can't fight everybody.
You're going to have to at some point say, hey, how do these mechanics work? How does this work? Can I do this? Can I do that? You're going to be asking some questions. You're going to be building some transactions. You're going to be looking for structure to make it work.
And for anyone who's ever read the Dungeon Master's Guide, it's not as straightforward as you would think.
No.
And you know that sometimes the answer you're looking for just is not there.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. Is you can't just take, like, for example, a brand new person you bring in an organization and say, here's your position, go for it.
Yeah.
With a very minimal guideline or guardrails as to what you should start with. They don't even understand the processes that they're going to be attempting to work on.
Or better yet, when you get put into a high-level position, you've never been in the organization, and they want you to write your job description.
Yeah.
I've been in that position.
That is a endeavor that you need some experience, some help along the way to know what would be good and what might be detrimental.
Yep.
And I think that would go the same way for transactional leaders. You can't just come in and look at how people are performing and then start having conversations about KPIs, conversations about processes, or things about data without some context into how.
There's a lot you're not going to know.
Yeah. Like for me, when I first became your boss, working in the department we worked in, I had no clue about how a lot of this worked. I had to rely on your experience in that position to understand some things. And we worked together quite a lot to understand a lot of things and to build relationships together with the team to then be able to unpack some of those data points, to then be able to say, this is what would be better, not what I need to see, but what you could do better in.
Yep. Because how are you supposed to know the why without that data set behind it? You don't know why these numbers are the way they are. You just know that they are. And data can tell you a false story pretty easily. Statistics can run you all sorts of directions that may not be true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and with transactional leadership, right, and I've been focusing on primarily, right, the clear structures, task oriented, but also that phrase rewards and punishments used to motivate team members, right? And that's kind of, I guess, where I've been focusing throughout the conversation on transactional oriented. And I think that's why when I mentioned earlier, using it for like an improvement plan, right? Nobody wants to hear that dreaded phrase, performance improvement plan or PIP, but there's a genuine place for it in the workplace when done correctly to help get somebody back on the track they need to be on. Or to liken our example of, you're new to this industry, this company, this position, so, go do it. Great. You might want some of that task oriented instruction, some clear guidance on what it is that you need to do today until you get the hang of it. But on the other hand, right, if you are doing well, you're performing in your role, and you're able to make your own adjustments to bring value, you're ready for that transformational leadership style and that environment where you can be creative and innovative and make positive change without somebody breathing down your neck. It can also, that transactional leadership can be just a killer for your ability to be productive and your ability to make those kinds of changes that the company hired you to make. And a leader who's not effectively using transactional leadership at the right time could squash all those positive things that they hired you for right out of you and create burnout, create resentment, because people don't generally want to be micromanaged for long. You can use it in situations where somebody maybe needs to be micromanaged. They need you to set those structures, to give them tasks, but it's not a sustainable solution for most people. They'll start to become resentful and upset and bitter. Maybe not bitter, but it's not healthy. People don't want to be in that environment, and so that's kind of how I think of transactional leadership. And I think one of the cons of it can be useful in limited situations for limited times for people who need it, but too much of it, and you're going to drive talent away to an environment where they can thrive, where they can be creative, where they can innovate. And because that's, at the end of the day, right, people want to do that. They want to be able to work in a way that brings value. And when you are so focused on the tasks and structures and punishment or reward based on, if you make your numbers this week, then we'll buy you some pizzas. And if you don't make your numbers, then, we're docking everyone's pay or something like that. There's a time and a place for that, potentially, but long term, you're going to drive people away.
Well, and there's always that joke of, oh, here comes another pizza party. We did something great.
Yeah, I know I rolled out that old trope, but all the same, right? When there's a reward for doing well, but punishment for doing poorly every week or every day, and someone's constantly watching everything that you're doing to make sure that you're on task, and you're not a problem performer, especially, or you haven't had a clear conversation with your leader about why they're doing this, why they're focusing on you in this way, it can be really demoralizing, and people will look for other places where they don't get treated that way.
Well, and like if we go back to our previous conversation, we talked about leading, supervising, managing, micromanagement, the different aspects of that. Micromanagement could just be looked at as giving someone structure, watching how their day goes, and helping guide the way. So it's not really micromanaging. It's just helping build the foundation for them to be successful.
There's a dichotomy to it. There's got to be a balance.
Yeah.
Right.
And like
I think that's what we talked about in that podcast as well, is there a time where micromanagement is what you want to do? And I think we were all aligned that there is a time for that. Yeah. It's just not all the time.
Yeah. And everyone's going to tell you something different, but there is a part of every person's brain that wants a structure. And you can't just say, okay, go be successful, or here's data and how you can be successful. Everyone needs to see a clear path to start with before they can make changes, before they can see growth, before they can see performance. So we know what the baseline is, and we also know how we can improve if there's room for improvement.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Like these two things, they really do go hand in hand. They help emphasize one another, but it takes us right into another one of our leadership styles, servant leadership. One of my favorite kinds of leadership, something that my first organization really wanted to emphasize, build, and develop in everyone that was in a leadership position, whether you're a supervisor, a manager, a leader, a store manager, whatever it was. Servant leaders prioritize serving their teams, focusing on the growth and the well-being of the people and the communities that they serve. These key characteristics that go with it is empathy, stewardship, and commitment to the personal development of team members. They focus on how to really be there for their team, how to put their team first and their community first, because without their teams, they really are nothing.
I fall into this category pretty heavily. The problem is if you don't have a balance to it, you can find yourself protecting people that need to be held accountable in a different way, because you have built a relationship with this person. You've gotten to know their struggles. You have empathy for their situation. And now you've lost sight of holding them accountable to benefit the business and the team. So you end up hurting yourself.
I think you hit on it right there too, though. Not to interrupt, I apologize.
No, you're good.
Right, but benefiting themselves or the business and the team, because you're absolutely right. That is a hard line to walk with servant leadership. How do you hold people accountable who need to be held accountable when you've built that close relationship? And my partner that I work directly with every day in my job, and I run into this fairly regularly. We care genuinely about our team members. We want them to be successful, and we want them to want to be here. And so we want to remove obstacles for them. We want to help them be successful. And you're absolutely right. We are guilty of being defensive of our crew, of our team from time to time. And I think that relates somewhat to our last podcast that we recorded about emotionally detaching from the situation, but also what we've taken to the conversation we've taken having with our team members when we do have to have a disciplinary discussion or even just a sit down coaching where we're trying to lay a foundation for what is going on and what we would like to see change to avoid disciplinary discussions in the future. We have taken to telling our team that we understand what you're going through. We understand where you're coming from. If there's something that you need us to help you with, please let us know. But you also have to understand that we have 35 other people that we have to look out for just as much as we're looking out for you. So we want you to be successful. We want to give you the tools, and we want to remove these obstacles, but we need you to work with us because their well-being depends on this result as well. And that's not to guilt trip them into trying to behave a different way. I hope that's not what we're doing. And if we are, by all means, please chip in and tell me that that's a terrible idea. We shouldn't be doing that. But I think the goal is to explain that, because it's hard sometimes for people to understand why they're being held accountable. Why am I getting a write-up, or why am I being put on final warning? Why am I potentially going to be terminated for this behavior when I'm doing it because I think it's what's right for the business? I'm correct, and that person isn't, or this process isn't. And that might be true on its base level, but the behavior that you're exhibiting and trying to show that is not correct, is not aligned with our beliefs, and we have to correct that behavior, not that you don't like this process. And the reason we have to do it is not because I want to get down on you, not because I want to bring the hammer down and say you're in trouble now, but because what you're doing is going to affect the 35 other people on my team and their success, and I can't have that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think one of the biggest challenges with servant leadership is, you're serving your team, you're embodying your team, but then your team needs to serve each other. You have to build this capability, this foundation, this culture that your team serves each other and everyone's best interests to help the common goal, and not just looking at one person in particular. And when you have all these relationships, 10, 20, 50, 100 people that report to you that you're building this culture with, it becomes a lot of work at the start. But then the more you get into it, the easier it gets, because you've built all this bind, you've built all this trust with everybody. As long as you've done it correctly, it starts to pay back because they help each other out. But one of the pitfalls is if you aren't embodying the culture that you want your team to be, you don't know what you're trying to serve. You don't know what your team's gonna look like. So you're adding more work to yourself, from my perspective. And that's really hard, because there are times where you don't even know what your ultimate goal is. And if you don't have a clear picture of that, then how can you make it easier for yourself? You can't.
I do think that that servant leadership has the capacity to be one of the more impactful styles of leadership. I think especially in the climate that we find ourselves in most businesses. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the general feeling amongst employees at most places is that they are not respected, they're not heard, and that the company doesn't care about them. Especially entry-level hourly employees. Hence the pizza party trope, right? Like, I work all week and I work really hard and I put my body on the line, and great, I got a pizza for management, right? That idea that's not showing me you care. That's just mollifying me so that I
Yet they still ask for it.
They do. People do still ask for it. That's true. But I think that there's an increase, at least from my perspective, in employees who don't feel like the companies care about them. And I don't know if that's related to companies being larger and larger than they've ever been. When you don't work for the grocery store that's owned by the guy down the road, but you're owned you work for a grocery store that's owned by a corporate conglomerate that owns grocery stores in 30 other states, and corporate and regional and even store leadership at some level are so focused on making those numbers, making budget, things like that, it feels like you as an employee have fallen to the wayside as a priority. And sadly, in many cases, you may have. I think that it can be really impactful to a team for someone who's never experienced it to go and work with somebody who engages in servant leadership, because for a change, right, now you are a person. You are someone who's cared about. There is somebody who wants what's best for you and wants to understand you as an individual, not just as a number on their timesheet. I think it has the potential to be very, very impactful. But I also think it has the potential to, like you said, Robby, lead to some pretty detrimental areas if it's not balanced out correctly. And I'll say I've fallen victim to getting bad advice when I was new in roles from employees who kind of thought they could pull the wool over your eyes. You don't know any better. And so you ask a question to understand a process or understand precedent so that you can be aligned with what the business has typically done. And somebody gives you bad advice because they want to take advantage of the fact that you don't know. And servant leadership, to me, requires a lot of trust in your people. And some people will abuse that trust for their own ends, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the big downfalls is that you have to be prepared to change your leadership style. And if you're not prepared to change your leadership style situationally, it could have some negative results as well.
Yeah, and that kind of leads us into the next style, which I'm kind of glad that these are.
Before we go to the next style, we've had a really good conversation about these three, and I'd hate for us to get cut off by hitting our mark. So I'd rather come back to those in another episode. Perfect. To break these next ones down, because there's a lot that we covered in these first three. There's a lot of things that can stand out with them, and we'll recap them again in another episode. But just transformational transaction servant leadership can go hand in hand, can be very successful if trust is there. And then the next ones we're going to cover are going to help us see a different perspective or a different light on leadership.
I guess, though, I want to close with one of the things about servant leadership that I learned that it's a really hard lesson is you have to work very hard as a leader to gain that trust with your team. To build those relationships, you have to invest a lot of time and energy into that.
It's probably the most emotionally draining form of leadership on this list.
And trust is not gained easily, but it is lost. It can be lost incredibly quickly, and sometimes you can't get it back. And for me, it's been a very exhausting line to walk, because, like I said, it's emotionally draining when you invest that much of yourself into your team, and when things don't go well, it's very easy to take more responsibility on that is yours to take. It's a rewarding way to lead, but you have to be careful with it, as with any style. But I mean, just from my own personal experience, I feel pretty strongly about it. You have to be careful.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in for part 1 of our conversation on introduction to exploring the leadership styles. Stay tuned for more from our leadership journal here with Nick and Jed as we break these down, and look forward to hearing from you, or look forward to hearing from us on our next episode here in the Leadership Journal.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.